The story I'm about to tell you, it isn't probable, not in its setting, not in its time frame, nor in its characters. What story could begin in the early 1900s off the shores of Lake Victoria? What could a Canadian priest, two researchers from Indiana University, and a Kiswahili translator from the UK possibly have in common? His name, Aniceti Kitereza, an ethnographer whose commitment to the preservation of his heritage put him on the Tanzanian and the African literary map. For he is Africa's Homer, and this is his story. Aniceti Kitereza, Scribe of Tanzania, the story of an epic. Well, you may wonder why I'm telling you this story. In 1968, my husband and I were studying African history and ethnomusicology at Indiana University. It seemed a natural sequence following 3.5 years of teaching high school students near Arusha, Tanzania in the early 60s. In those early years, we knew absolutely nothing about this continent called Africa, and certainly not about the country of Tanzania. But after 8 years, we were a bit more seasoned and ready to embark on a year of research, going to the island of Ukerewe in Lake Victoria, Tanzania. So with our 3 kids, we left Arusha and started a 2-day journey through the plains of the Serengeti, keeping young eyes on alert from morning till dusk. And finally, coming to the port of Mwanza, we were ferried to this island, 70 miles long, 10 miles wide, which would be our home for a year. It was home to 3 distinct ethnic groups. Immigrants had come over the years because of its reliable rainfall, meaning that cassava, rice, beans, and fish would provide reliable nutrients. For my husband Jerry, the research focus that he had was on those first inhabitants of the island, the Bakarebe, and he would be listening with the elders and determining which parts of their history could be translated from word and finally to print. So every day he left on bike and went on foot and spent time then listening to these elders. The rest of us homeschooled in the morning, and then we'd join him when we could. That meant many times feasting on ugali, samaki, and chicha, always sipping tea, and always listening quietly. When we first met Aniceti Kitereza, he told us he was 74 years old. And his story, his personal story, is quite remarkable. He said that at the turn of or early 1900s, when the Catholic priests established churches and schools on the island, because he was from the royal clan, he was encouraged to enter primary school. And he quickly proved to be an able student, so much so that the Catholic priests encouraged him to enter the seminary. And so he left the island, went to the seminary, and for 10 years he studied to become a priest. He became fluent in many languages and received distinction in all of his studies. But after 10 years, he decided the priesthood wasn't for him. So he married Anakatura and returned to the ordinary life of being a farmer on Ukerewe. Now during this time frame, the colonial administration would not allow him, in spite of his academic background, to have a position above that of a teacher. So for the next 20 years, that's what he did. He farmed and he taught. In 1940, a Canadian priest by the name of Father Simard came to the island. When he met Kitereza, he was quite amazed with his academic background and realized that Kitereza was frustrated, having never been able to use those abilities. So he encouraged him to start documenting and putting to print those customs of the past so they'd be preserved for the future. And so Aniceti began to do this. When he brought the first chapters to Father Simard, the response was, you know, this really reads like a textbook. Why don't you put it into a story? Then young people would be more eager to read it. And that's what he did. He wrote about a couple, Miombakeri, the husband, Buganoka, his wife, and they were barren, a curse in African society. And through the story, he also included those folk tales and customs that he felt needed to be preserved. When the document was finished, he brought it to Father Simard in 1945, and Father Simard had it typed. It turned out to be 365 single-spaced pages. And realizing it was such a rare manuscript, he had it copied and put it under lock and key at the seminary in a safe. Over the years, different researchers had come to the island. They'd heard about this amazing ethnographer and knew that there was a manuscript available, so 2 manuscripts had disappeared with researchers. So when we came, you can imagine it took a little time for Kitereza to establish trust with my husband and to say, I have 1 copy left of this manuscript. Do you think it could be published? Well, there was no doubt in my husband's mind that this was a literary find. So he contacted the Tanzanian Publishing Company immediately. But their response was this: it's written in Kitereza, the readership is too small. It must be translated into Swahili, and then we'll reconsider. And so, in front of his mud and wattle home, under the canopy of a mango tree, 2 orange crates making a desk, he began to hand translate 365 typewritten pages from Kitereza to Kiswahili. This meant we bought reams of paper weekly and supplies of big pens, and even a hot water bottle, because he suffered greatly from rheumatism, and his thatched roof gave him little respite during the rains. After he completed several chapters into Kiswahili, we submitted them again to Tanzanian Publishing Company, but they were not particularly excited about doing anything, so Jerry pressed on and sent a letter and the copies to Heinemann's in London. There was a Swahili translator on staff by the name of John Allen, and when he read it, he said, "Who is this man?" So amazed was he that he and his wife went to Ukerewe to meet Aniceti and Anna. And so why was he amazed? Well, when he read it, it was in 1968, and in 1945 it was written 2 decades before the birth of the African Writers series. And in addition, he recognized that it was an African epic of note. In a way, you could say, not unlike the leaky discovery of the first humanoid in Olduvai Gorge. So now the book, Miombukere and Bunoka. When we asked Aniceti, why did you write it the way you did? This is what he said: "It was in my heart to write about habits, customs, and practices of our fathers long ago, of the particular practices and how people work together to help one another, even those in neighboring villages." Now, what is very distinctive about this statement is that his writing is not only about chronicling customs. He very distinctively focused on the values of living communally and what would occur in Kitereza life that would possibly tear the community apart. So to illustrate this more clearly, I will use the strings of this sinaga, a 7-trough zither that is unique to Ukerewe. And each one of these strings will be emblematic, if you will, of the values and the challenges in the Kitereza culture. And so we begin with the male character, Miombukere, whose wife is barren. And because of that, the challenges and tensions between himself and his wife, his in-laws, and the clan make Aniceti write this: "Can life have meaning without children?" The second is Bunoka, the wife. She's barren, but through no fault of her own. And he writes, "Misfortune comes with no warning. It can occur in the morning, at any time, and it can happen to anyone. These things are the power of God." The third string is Ntalanawo, the son. It is a challenge for any parent to raise a child from infancy to adulthood in sub-Saharan Africa. And so he writes, "There is not a man who is able to say, 'As for me, I do not have death in my body.' If he does, he is a fool." The next string is Bulawali, their daughter. And she represents the vulnerabilities of daily living, of having and immediately having not in a subsistence culture. One day a man may have wealth, strength in body, and joy in heart, but tomorrow it may all vanish, leaving grief beyond measure. And the next string, a Kitereza folktale that focuses on gender roles and the fractious repercussions of outsiders coming into an established community. I translated this folktale in 1970, and it was published in Natural History. As a result, because they pay by column, Aniceti and Anna were able to replace their thatched roof with bati. And then the ever-present aspect of disease in its particularities. tsetse fly, malaria, dysentery, to name a few. To hide a disease is to want it revealed by mourners. And then finally, the identity issue of language. I've written about these things from long ago, before the white man came. I wrote in our language, Kitereza, so our children would understand and know our honorable ways. Now, these harmonics of a peaceable kingdom, focusing on those values that promote communal living, are not unlike what Julius Nyerere encompassed in his Ujamaa theories in the early days of Tanzania's independence. It is important to note that Tanzania is the only country in sub-Saharan Africa and one of the few worldwide that has never experienced civil war. We left Ukerewe in 1968. My husband carried all of his historical notes, and I hand-carried the first chapters that were translated by Aniceti. And over the next 12 years, volumes of letters were exchanged between us. And that included publishing companies and the many people who were very focused on getting his words in print. And finally, in 1980, 35 years after it was first written, Bwana Myombekere and Bibi Bugunoka was born. The Tanzanian Publishing Company decided it was time to put it into print. And in many ways, this book was Aniceti, an honest child. For they had 4 children, and none of them lived beyond the age of 4. And so there were aspects of this story that were autobiographical. Over the next 10 years, Aniceti's writing was translated into English, French, and German. But unfortunately, neither Aniceti, Anakatura, or my husband lived to see that reality. Now you may wonder why I've told you this story. Well, it is because in spite of these remarkable writings of Aniceti's, he continues to be unheralded and quite unknown, including his homeland of Tanzania. So over the next years, I will be writing his biography in collaboration with Professor Joseph Mbele and Ishmael Mbisa, and it will be in Kiswahili and English. In addition, there is one of his folk tales that will be included in a publication. It focuses on aspects of difference from the perspective of a black-faced monkey and a white-faced lizard. It's called Nkwambu and Nkende. It too will be bilingual, and it will have tinga-tinga illustrations. And finally, the possibility of an app wrap for cell phone and iPod users. As I write about this Tanzanian scribe, about this African epic, and about this literary genius, his words will be my mantra. Words that are spoken fly like the wind. Words that are written live forever.